Out of the many mic manufacturers out there, this week we look at a company that has one of the richest histories in terms of contributing to the art of recording. And they've only been putting out mics for a few years now. We're looking at Universal Audio and the SP-1, this time on the Mic Locker. Universal Audio started many years ago with one man, Milton T. Bill Putnam, born February 20th, 1920 in Danville, Illinois, to a well-off coal entrepreneur that also dabbled in the local radio scene. Bill got his first taste of electrical engineering as a kid while in the Boy Scouts while trying to earn his wireless merit badge. He fell in love with audio and radio and earned his Class B ham license by the age of 15. By the time he was a junior in high school, he was gigging with local jazz bands as a singer and also owned his own radio shop, which he later sold to go study broadcast engineering at Valparaiso Tech. After college, Bill returned home and went to work for WDWS, a radio station in Champaign, Illinois, and later WDAN, a new radio station in Danville, where he would get into all sorts of trouble by trying to DIY everything, including trying to change a light bulb on a 300-foot radio tower in the dead of night in the wind and snow. He eventually went back to WDWS to become chief engineer. When World War II began, Bill was given a draft notice, and he took a civil service role with the Army Corps of Engineers, where he worked on radio ranges. You could think of them as GPS before that was a thing for aircraft navigation. Bill also worked for G2, which was a military intelligence operation that were developing miniaturized mine and gun detectors during the war. Bill also put his musical interests to work recording big bands for the Armed Forces Network. After the war, in 1946, Bill returned to Illinois to start the Universal Recording Corporation in Evanston. There, he would develop new recording equipment as well as record radio shows for the ABC radio network. In 1947, Bill moved shop to Chicago into the Chicago Civic Opera Building, where he would work with a group called the Harmonicats, and there he would make history. While recording the group, Bill felt the production needed a little more something to make the recording interesting and have it stand out from the rest of the crowd. His inspiration came from all places, the bathroom. That's right, Bill set up a microphone and speaker in the bathroom to use as the first echo chamber. Bill said it worked quite well up until someone flushed the toilet or made some other non-musical sounds. Putnam was also the first to record a single vocalist singing more than one part at the same time. Using a wire recorder and a disc lathe, they were able to cobble together a crude multi-track setup, which would get bounced down to another device. This was shortly before Les Paul achieved the same result using magnetic tape. For what it's worth, Bill and Les were actually really good friends. It wasn't long before top-tier acts were seeking Bill out for his engineering services. Count Basie, Sarah Vaughan, Duke Ellington, just to name a few. He pioneered half-speed mastering, allowing for better-sounding records. Even Sam Phillips sent Bill one of Elvis's tracks to master, asking for it to be hot with loads of presence and bass. The loudness wars started way earlier than we think. Eventually, Bill would be talked into moving his operation to California, and with the help of folks like Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby, he was able to take over an old soundstage building and convert it into United Recording. Business was so good, Bill eventually took over the building next to his and added it onto the recording complex, which was then renamed United Western Recorders. The studio would remain busy and at the forefront of the music industry in California for years, until 1985, when he sold the complex to Alan Sides, who renamed the facility Ocean Way Recording. There's a lot more to this story and way more than I can fit into one of these videos. I'll leave some links to a few great articles that pretty much sum up Bill's entire life, as told by Bill himself. Back when Bill moved to California, he took with him a small operation of his called Universal Audio. That was producing audio equipment that Bill had designed. Things like the 100D mic pre and the 50BA equalizer. Bill had also developed the 610 tube console with effect sends built into each channel, another first. They took an opportunity to acquire two other companies, Studio Electronics Corp, or SEC, and the broadcast division of Babcock Electronics, which held the patent rights to none other than the LA2A compressor. In his quote, spare time, unquote, Bill designed new devices like the 176 tube compressor, which eventually turned into the transistor 1176. He worked with Dwayne Cooper to come up with the Cooper Time Cube, which, if you don't know what that is, it's essentially a giant garden hose coiled up in a box with a small speaker on one end and a mic on the other, which allowed for a delayed signal. Yes, an acoustic delay device in a box. Absolutely crazy. Bill would go on to foster the birth of other devices under the renamed United Recording Electronics Industries, or URI. Devices like time-aligned monitors, graphic EQs like what we got going on back there, as well as countless iterations of previous devices like the LA3A, LA4, and many, many revisions of the 1176. Eventually, Bill would sell his interest in the company to Harman, which put their devices with the likes of JBL, amongst others also acquired by Harman. Later on, Harman would also take over AKG, as we saw in our history dive for that company. Bill would pass away in 1989 at the age of 69 in Riverside, California. 10 years later, Bill's sons, James and Bill Jr., found their father's design notes for the 1176 and the LA2A and decided to breathe life back into them. Bill Jr. was an engineering student at Stanford and the CCRMA, or the Center for Research in Music and Acoustics, which was part of Stanford's music department. Armed with a bunch of schematics, he and some colleagues got to work emulating the physical design of some of his father's hardware in software. They went to great lengths to try and emulate the smallest of details, like the way a transformer would ring or how some nonlinear feedback parts of some circuits reacted. It was both challenging and equally rewarding. The company would go on to produce arguably some of the best plugins ever at the time. Since the plugins were so intricate, dedicated hardware was required to run them. They repurposed some old vector graphics processing cards to run the plugins, and the UAD ecosystem was born. The company went from a basement project to a full-blown industry leader in the matter of about a decade, releasing some of the most popular interfaces. The Apollo, around 2012, the interface integrated both the UAD2 processing architecture, which was an upgraded UAD1, as well as brilliantly designed digital-controlled preamps and high-quality converters. The company would branch out into more entry-level equipment with their Volt interfaces released only a few years ago, as well as a number of other products like guitar pedals, an amp power soak box, and eventually microphones. UA partnered with Bach to put out his line of mics, as well as the indie startup Townsend, which was our first YouTube video. Really got to redo that one. It wasn't long before UA was putting out their own brands of mics that looked suspiciously similar to other mics. Which brings us to today's subject, the SP-1, or Standard Pencil 1. The SP-1 comes in a match set for around $399 USD. It does occasionally go on sale for a little less, depending on where you're looking and when. In the odd packaging, you'll find the mics with a couple of clips and a plastic stereo bar. I guess it'll work in a pinch if you have nothing else. It is kind of cheap feeling though. And it also comes with a couple of windscreens. I have to take a second here to address how weird this packaging is. I know they're trying to keep costs down and all, but just about every company gives at least a bag to store the mics in or something. This box has odd cutouts on the side to allow you to easily remove the inner box from the outer box. And then it has this weird seatbelt material handle, as if this is supposed to be considered the transport case. It's just kind of odd. Anywho, the circuit seems to follow the Shep CMC5 transformerless design. Without seeing the schematic, I can't quite tell for sure, but it certainly looks very similar to other mics I have that follow that topology. The cardioid capsule is removable, so it is possible for UA to put out other capsules like an Omni or a supercardioid if they saw fit in the future. Because the pin is so far recessed into this capsule, I don't have any other aftermarket capsules to test with, as they just don't fit. There are other small diaphragm condenser mics that you can swap the capsules out with for different brands and everything, and they work fine. In addition, I'm also not able to tell if the capsule uses the Neumann-style cross-slit design or the circular pattern on cheaper mics. If anyone has taken one of these things down to the bone, please share your findings. Very interested to find that out. The mics are slightly heavier than the MXL pencils that I have in the studio, likely due to the paint and better metal quality for the body, even though the UA mic is about a half a centimeter shorter. UA doesn't provide any kind of polar graph or frequency response chart, which I find really odd, since that's one of the first things most people look at when shopping for a mic. Recently, UA put out some software to go along with these standard mics that they have called Hemisphere. I guess it's only part of the sphere, like from the sphere mic. Anyway, since the SP-1 and the SD-1 for that matter only have a single element, there's no way to change polar patterns the way you can with the sphere mic and software. So what is the software and what is it doing? And you're about to now find out why I don't do reviews on plugins. Okay, I have Hemisphere open on the left here, and then I have Plugin Doctor open on the right so we can see the frequency response changes from each of the mic models. I have the mic about 4 or 5 inches from my mouth off center so I don't get any of the plosive problems with it. So let's take a quick look and see what's going on here. First up, we have the SD54, which is based off of Neumann's KM184, which we briefly touched upon in the primer video. We saw Bee's Knees was using this as the inspiration for their small diaphragm tube condenser. This is a cardioid tube SDC, and we're just going to play around with the knobs here a little bit just so we can hear what's going on here. Here are the filters. And next we have the SD56, which is based off the Neumann KM56. Surprise. This was one of Neumann's most expensive mics at the time and was a multi-pattern small diaphragm condenser. It's a very interesting capsule design. If you ever get a chance to look up how this thing was made, it's pretty interesting. And here's how the mic sounds as we play around with that axis knob a little bit. And next up we have the SD84, which of course is based off the Neumann KM84. While Neumann claims that this was the first microphone to use phantom power, Schoeps actually holds that record, but there is one distinction. The KM84 was the first microphone to use 48-volt phantom power. The Schoeps used a lower voltage. And the next one that we have here is the SD86, which is based off of another Neumann microphone, the KM86. This is another multi-pattern small diaphragm condenser and is a transistorized version of the Neumann KM66. It's a very odd-shaped mic. It kind of looks more like a handheld stage mic than a small diaphragm condenser. And lastly, we have the only non-Neumann microphone out of the bunch, the SD451, which is based off the AKG C451. Based on the pick, I'm going to assume that this is a model of a vintage unit with the CK1 capsule. AKG is still making the 451. It's now called the C451B. The 451 was AKG's first FET condenser microphone, and the original spec sheet had it as flat as the KM84. Although, I don't think they sounded anything alike, but yay marketing. Okay, right now we're looking at the harmonics of each model. I have the plugin bypassed right now, so it doesn't click and pop as we change models here. But I just wanted to see if anything was going on with the harmonic modeling and see if anything really was changing between these. And it really doesn't look like there's much going on in that respect. It looks like the harmonics are just changing with the frequency curve of each model. I want to mention that this software is free as long as you purchase one of the SD mics from UA. All you have to do is go to their website, enter the serial number of the mic that you have, and it will unlock in your UA control panel. I'm just going to quick flip through all of these just to see if there's any difference here. But again, I don't really see much of a difference. This is probably pretty cool to use if you have unison-enabled pre's on an Apollo interface, but other than that, it kind of just seems like an EQ. But do these curves make this mic sound like any of these other mics? I don't know, and I'll probably never be able to tell, as some of these mics are pretty much unobtainium at this point, with a pair of KM54 or 56s going for well over 10 grand easily. I have a line when it comes to the cost of mics, and 5 figures is way over that line. And I don't care what it is, I don't see any mic being worth that practically. Except for maybe collector's value. Different story, but too rich for my blood. The 451 is a little more doable, but still not something I feel I need to own. Are these options a fun way to get different sounds out of these mics quickly? Sure, you bet. Will you probably have to still EQ these after you've EQ'd them with the software for a mix? Yeah, probably. So is it worth it? Well, that's up to you and your workflow. So let's take these mics into the studio and throw them up on the piano, acoustic guitar, drum overheads, hi-hat, and acoustic bass. That pretty much should cover the entire frequency spectrum and give us a real good idea of what these mics actually sound like. Let's get to it. All right, so what did you think of the mics? For their affordability, do they stand up regardless of price point, or do they fall into the cadre of overhyped top-end pencils that the market has too many of already? While I certainly think they're usable in any of the scenarios that we placed them in, I'm not sure I'd pass up my go-tos in place of these, but for a busy session that I need a couple more evenly paired mics, sure thing, I probably wouldn't hesitate to pull these out of the mic locker. This has been our first review in our series on small diaphragm mics. Be sure to check out the next video when we take a deep dive into another new kid on the scene, Warm Audio, and their KM184 clone, the WA84. As always, if you've gotten anything from today's video, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're interested in studio mics and other things audio related, please hit the notify button so you'll be notified when we put up a new video. If you have any suggestions for a video or questions regarding this one, please use the comment section or send us a message through our website. I'd love to hear from you. Well, that's it for this time. This is Pags, signing off.